It's one of the most well-known shipwrecks in Delaware history. The Debraak sank off the coast of Cape Henlopen in the late 18th century.
All these years later, the ship is a major focus as many try to preserve this piece of the past for our future. It was back in 2013 when our very first field correspondent for Delmarva Life, Brian Spiros, visited the Zwanendale Museum in Lewis to see how the Debraak is being remembered, and that's today's Monday Memory.
Take one look at the Zwanendale Museum in Lewis and you'll see why it stands out.
A lot of people do think that it is a church, but it was actually built as a museum. It was built in 1931, 300 years after the Dutch arrived here in 1631.
Bridget Warner is the site supervisor for the Zwanendale Museum. Since the area of Lewis was first discovered by the Dutch, Bridget says the building is patterned after the town hall of Hoorn, which is in the Netherlands.
When you go outside, if you look on top of the building, the guy on top of the building is David Peter de Vries. He was from Hoorn, Holland. He was the patroon or the money guy for that first group of settlers that came here in 1631.
There are many exhibits inside the museum, but one of the newest showcases artifacts from the Debraak, a British Royal Navy ship that sank off the coast of Delaware more than 200 years ago.
You have several display cases here inside the museum of artifacts and items that were sort of pulled from the shipwreck. Explain what's in this display case here.
This case contains artifacts that depict what the officers would have used on board ship. And for the most part, these items are a bit finer quality than the enlisted men would have had. One of the most interesting artifacts, I think, is this condiment bottle here. This is a bottle that contained ketchup. Not like the ketchup that we would have today. This ketchup would have been made from anchovies, mushrooms, spices, mixed with some stale beer. Not a very palatable flavor, I wouldn't imagine.
No, it doesn't sound good at all.
What makes the story of the Debraak so unique? This is one of those instances where not only do you get to see the artifacts and read the stories, you can also see the shipwreck up close. That's because it's not too far away at Cape Henlopen State Park.
All right, so here she is. Explain what we're looking at here.
What you're seeing here is the remnant of the Debraak's hull. And to orient you, you're seeing the left side, or the port side.
Charles Fithian is an archaeologist for the Delaware State Museums. He's been working with the Debraak for the last 26 years.
She gives us a glimpse into the human experience at sea that we cannot get any other way.
The Debraak was part of a class of ships known as sloops of war. The Royal Navy used them all over the world to protect British territories and commerce.
They can be very powerful. Debraak's firepower amounted to about 16 guns that had a total broadside weight of 348 pounds. That's a lot of iron flying away from the ship should her guns go into action. So they combined that with speed, agility, shallow draft, and it made them a very powerful ship. She was entirely constructed of oak. We have done a wood map of the hull, and we do see some other more unusual woods get used in places, but they're mainly repairs.
Charles says in May of 1798, the Debraak was protecting commerce ships in the Atlantic Ocean. It had gotten separated from the convoy after going after an unidentified ship.
She was in the process of working her way back up the coast of the United States and arrived in the Delaware Bay at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on May 25th. And at that point, a storm was brewing and struck the vessel and caused the vessel to capsize and sink. We know from the historical record that about 35 of her crew were lost out of a crew contingent of 86.
The British made attempts to salvage the ship months later, but failed. Fast forward to 1984, treasure hunters located the ship and began bringing artifacts to the surface. Charles was there in 1986 when the Debraak was loosened from the mud and sand and raised from the water.
A project like this is very complex in terms of its conservation. You have artifacts that have sat on the sea floor for nearly 2 centuries, and they've become, in some cases, destabilized. Other ones are extraordinarily well preserved.
In the early 1990s, Debraak came to where it now sits, inside this storage building. Sprinklers come on several times a day, which is important to keep what's left intact.
The spray right now keeps the timbers of the hull wet. If we did not do that, what you would have is uncontrolled drying. The cell walls would collapse because they're filled with water, and she would literally fall apart in a matter of weeks.
And keeping the Debraak together is crucial.
Of the various sloops of war that the British had, this is the only one that we actually have. They lost many of them during the course of the wars with Revolutionary France and then Napoleon. But of that group, this is the only one that has been recovered to date and that we have direct information from.
This is not Debraak's final resting place. Charles says he and others are still trying to figure out a way to preserve the boat forever.
What will work for one project is not an automatic fit for another. So what we have to come up with is going to have to be very tailored to the Debraak and its specific needs.
When that will happen is still unknown, an unknown that remains near and dear to Charles. As a young boy, he always had a fascination with American and British naval ships.
So to be able to work on one of them was an unexpected professional treat. When I started out in archaeology, I never figured I would be involved in it. And when I got involved with this project, it was pretty exciting.
For now, Charles and those at the Zwannendale Museum will continue to focus on educating and preserving, all in the name of the Debraak.
It's amazing. It's amazing to see that older ship right there like that. Okay, just to let you know, still on display, a seaborne citizenry, the Debraak, and its Atlantic world is on display at the Zwannendale Museum. The museum is open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 10 to 4:15. Guess how much you got to pay to get in? Nothing. It's free. Just walk in.